would say about 6 of them identified the selection of the Bond Oversight Committee as a problem area. And the way it was done upon my return was that SGI, who's the bond management and company, basically submitted a name for the board to approve. There was no application, there was no interview, it was just pretty much they selected and the board approved. The board chose to change that policy at our recommendation. Our recommendation also at that time was to expand the board from the Bond Oversight Committee from 7 to 9 members and to see if we can get more diversity, more gender equity on the board. So one of the issues that has come up from time to time is, are the process and procedures being followed, and is in fact the Bond Oversight Committee the equivalent of the Board of Trustees? The board policy, and that's why it's kind of significant, that's being referred to, is one that is for the Board of Trustees, which is an elected body. It's an elected body by the public, and it's not an appointed body, so there is some differences. And that's why I wanted to get clarification from the beginning, because if you, as a group, had discussed and vetted and wanted to change the process from a selection as a elected body to one that's appointed, then that also has some additional requirements. For instance, there's requirements for these ladies and gentlemen that they all live within the district. Some of you do not. There's requirements that they not be from other elected bodies, being on other boards that might be perceived as being in conflict with this board in terms of the goals and mission and vision of the district. So while it sounds like I'm being picky and being difficult, it is done with the interest that you described. Now, I agree we can disagree without being disagreeable. My point is this: approximately a year ago, in April of 2012, there was concern brought up by both the community and you as appointed board members that the process was taking too long. So we asked, and this board gave approval, to ask the HR division in our office to do the process. Now, in many districts, that's not a requirement of the HR office, but they did require an application, they did require an interview, and in my review of the process and procedures for that interview, this last time I discovered some discrepancies. Discrepancy number one, at least one member of the committee did not sign the confidential disclosure. At that point, they should have been removed from the committee. That's our administrative regulations. Additionally, in the vetting of the candidates, it was very evident from feedback that I received that people were determining who should be moved forward for the board to consider. And I don't believe that that's in the best interest of the district. So we have a 9-member board, 7 positions that are filled, and it just so happens the 7 are all male. 2 of the 4 candidates that were interviewed were female and successful and highly qualified. So I did ask some tough questions, and I did let the board know about my concern. Respectfully submitted.
Mr. Butler.
I agree with some of the things Dr. Brand said. I'm actually the longest sitting member on this committee, and I was appointed the old way. SGI met me at Starbucks and put my name forward, and that was all there was to it. No application, no conflict of interest. And I thought that was odd at the time, but that was the way it was done. And since then, I've been pleased with the process change that the board came up with. I sat in on one of the interviews prior to Mr. Marinovich, and I thought it was I compliment HR. I thought they did an excellent job. I worked for the county for nearly 37 years, and I was a department head. And there was no way would I get involved and I wouldn't have any of my management people get involved with the initial interviewing and stuff like that. That's what you've got HR there for. It's an independent body. I think that's really critical, and I think the process we have in place now is a good process. I agree it would be nice to have gender equality on this board and everything, but it shouldn't be the criteria that we don't appoint people by. Ultimately, we want people that understand what's going on and can follow. It's very complicated. We're all volunteers, and the financial reports we're given, and now we're getting involved with bonds and floating bonds out there and all kinds of other things, in addition to reviewing the projects for construction, and Kevin's a good expert on that and everything. It's what you bring to the committee, not what your gender is necessarily. And we, like Terry said, we really need to fill this committee with all the bodies that we need. Because it is hard to do our job and everything. Our meetings have turned into 3-hour meetings instead of, with SGI, it was a 1 hour, real quick, this is what you're doing. I just kind of looked around and everybody was nodding their head and it was done. And there was no real questioning. And I was one of the first ones that started questioning SGI. Well, how come these numbers don't add up to these numbers here? It doesn't make sense to me. I want you to redo things and everything. So, with all due respect to Mr. McCann, I hesitate to go back to that method because I think it's taking a step backward, letting the board be involved in personally putting names forward. I think you've got a really good process in place now. You've got the HR, it's independent. I sat on that committee. I represented the bond committee. It had other people from the district. It had nothing to do with our oversight committee. It was impartial and came up with a set of names, and that went forward, and that's how many of these members got on the board and everything. So I think it's a good process. I just, and I understand what Dr. Brand said about the gender thing and everything. The non-disclosure thing, I think, is a petty thing for a reason, throwing out the thing, but the gender thing shouldn't be the primary thing. Certainly, we should seek that. If we have equal candidates, and that's a choice, then yeah, you need to do that. But if you've got somebody who stands out with knowledge, represents the community and everything, I think you have to make that appointment. So that's all I've got to say.
Mr. McCann. And Mr.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I would respectfully disagree, though. I think one of the key points here is transparency. And I've got to say that the last couple of appointees, whether they were good or bad, I didn't really get any information on them. And ultimately, the interviews, and I think again, Cheryl Cox, Greg Cox, everybody who we've jury-rendered, everybody along the line at the City of Chula Vista has used a similar process. You can go through, the applicants can show their ability to interview properly in front of the public. It shouldn't just be you guys interviewing, it shouldn't just be us. But it should involve the community as well. And I can tell you there were several times when you had a favorite candidate at the City of Chula Vista that would ultimately, you would think, well, gosh, this guy sounds like a shoo-in. But we would find somebody who would come out of the woodwork who would just knocks our socks off, and they would get selected. And I think if the key thing to me is making sure that this process is in the public. And what are the accusations right now? The accusations are, oh, it went to HR and Dr. Brand, controls HR. I've heard accusations that...
No. That's definitely not that.
No.
That. I don't think anybody's making that
No.
contention. I think
Okay,
HR,
well,
I think your
there's a
HR
lot of-
department's great, and I think they conducted this very fair, impartial interviews.
Brand, yes.
Go ahead.
I appreciate your comments, but I did have the floor, Mr. Miller.
Okay.
We also had accusations, again, is this something where the predetermined of the Bond Oversight Committee, again, I'm just telling you the accusation, I'm not making it, but that the people who interviewed from the Bond Oversight were trying to push their own candidate. I think the best thing to do is to be able to have this out in public, and to be able to have the applications looked at, discussed in public, and then the most qualified candidates be selected by the board. ultimately is this board's responsibility to run the district. And I think that whether it's the city, whether it's the county, whether it's the school district or any other agency, I've seen too much advocation of responsibility by elected officials. And, you know, if there are going to be decisions made, I want to be part of that decision and be responsible for it. And many of the decisions of the, again, selected board members, I didn't get them through. And again, I totally disagreed with the idea that how you were appointed. And when we had the debate last time, I brought this same process up. But obviously, we saw a big, incredibly horrific fight at the last board meeting.
Discussion.
And Ms. Lopez, I have the floor, please. Okay.
Ms. Lucas, please.
Yes, I just said clarification, I'm sorry.
We had this horrific fight that I thought was frankly embarrassing because, you know, I want to make sure that we are professional. I think we should be able to disagree without being disagreeable. And we should have this different thoughts of ideas. Now, again, I'm here to bring a solution. Ultimately, it'll be the 5 board members that'll make that solution. I brought different solutions to the board. This last one I did on the bond oversight, it was 4-1. I lost with no other support from any other board member. But suddenly, the controversy of the current system has been extremely, has bubbled up, and it has been there for the last several months. And the best way to allow for transparency is to put it in public in sunshine. And again, I really do appreciate your comments, Mr. Butler. But I think that the best thing for this district is to put it all out there and let the public see the process and then get input on that process.
Okay, now we can have a point of clarification from Mr. Butler, and Mr. Marinovich is next.
Good,
and then
Just,
Dr. Brown.
I don't disagree with this board openly discussing the candidates that are put forward from HR. I think that's a good thing for you to question them in public and everything. The problem in the process here is the names never got forward to the board. It stopped at Dr. Brand, and I think that's the part of the process we're having an issue with. I think it's a good idea. It's exactly what you said. But I think it's a good process now that the board puts, that the HR puts forth names to you, because quite frankly, you have trouble getting through, no offense, but you have a lot of trouble getting through your meetings now. You're trying to add a whole other layer to your responsibilities. And I don't know what's going to happen with that. I think you've got a good process, and I agree with you. You should be able to interview those candidates in public that are put forward. And if you don't like them, you have good reasons, that's fine and everything. I think the problem, my problem was, is it didn't get forward to you. Just for clarification.
And we do have 20 minutes left, so Mr.
Yeah,
Marinovich.
I was going to say, in the interest of time, I'll make my comments brief. There is one speaker on this item. Okay, we'll have to just maybe make my point first. You know, and I'll be quick. There was a process that was set in place for the filling of this latest 2 positions, and we went through that process, I thought, and I was part of that process. And there seems to be a disconnect between that process and what ended up before the board. You've got the opportunity as elected officials, I'm not one, but you are one, to set that process and tell that person there that that's the process we want to have go forward, and stick with it and make him implement it. And not, if you don't want him interfering, tell him, Dr. Brand, I don't want you interfering in the selection process. Let the committee, let HR do their thing. Unless there's something wildly unusual, let the committee's recommendation go before the board. And if you have concerns and you want to know what then maybe you want to interview the other people. But when there's a disconnect between what I thought the process was and what ended up happening at the board meeting, it creates a hullabaloo that's an unnecessary one. And I think that's where I'm coming from this chair is tell the superintendent what the process is, whatever you want to do, and make him adhere to it so we all understand what the game rules are. And that's like what didn't happen last time as far as I could tell. And that's my point. So I don't know what you, anyway, that's it.
And,
We have a-
and for me, I was a little bit like Mr. Butler. I was a young kid, and Mayor Cox, it wasn't Cheryl Cox, it was Greg Cox, called me and said, hey, you want to be on a planning commission? I didn't even know what a planning commission was barely at the time. But I said, sure. And so tore into it. I was young, I was energetic. 4 months later, I got elected to the Sweetwater School Board. So I said, hey, no problem, I can handle all of this. I'm single, I'm young, I can do all this. And then I got a letter in the mail from the Attorney General of the state of California saying you cannot serve two masters. In fact, it was non-competing offices. You could not serve on a planning commission and serve on the Sweetwater School Board at the same time. All of a sudden, I woke up. And, you know, it put the fear of Buddha or God or whatever into me. And I realizing that this is bigger than a breadbasket. And I think that's what we're all saying. That we want to dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that we are compliant. But at the same time, have the level of transparency that Mr. McCann and I think all of us want. So, and so I would actually be open more to a hybrid of what Mr. McCann proposed, but we can discuss that at a later time. Dr. Brett.
Thank you. Well, I use the word you as a collective you. I don't use it as an individual. You all have a public relations problem here in the community. If you read the paper this morning, you all aren't exactly the happiest campers in the world, and I don't think the community is either. And I think a lot of it is reflected on this particular item alone. Mr. McCann, you brought it up. You said you want to have transparency. Amen, brother. But it didn't happen in this process. So how can we have one area where we want to say we have transparency, but there's none in this process? That's a conflicting problem. I think you can see it, and I can see that you see it. So let's make sure that that continues in the future to have transparency. I have nothing against Dr. Brand and his work. It's none of my responsibility. What is my responsibility is to protect the public, to watch out for their funds. And again, transparency. Why does the performance audit come to you all before it gets to us? I said it should come jointly, so we all can look about it. There's no secrets about it. We're here to serve the public just like you are. Yes, we're appointed. How do we find out that we're appointed? Here's an example of professionalism. Hopefully, somebody calls, sends you a letter, lets you know, right, that you've been appointed to this body. I found out at Einstein's on a Saturday morning over a cup of coffee from somebody who happens to be related to one of the people on this board. That's totally unprofessional. So I think we have to dot our I's and cross our T's in every step of the way. If you interview people, and they're recommended by HR, and that's the process in place, if there's a distinct disadvantage that comes out of the interview process, it should be brought out to you all, and the people who did the interviewing should know about it. But it shouldn't be held behind closed doors and then brought to you all, and suddenly it's exposed, and now people are really disappointed, and things are unhappy, and where did the trust go? The same place it has gone. So I hope that with this meeting today, my wish would be that we continue to have everything out in the open, working with us to get this process and others that we're working on with you out to the public so that they feel like their interest is being watched and respected. Thank you.
Mr. Marinovich, I think we need to move to the performance audit.
We do
We
have a
really didn't
speaker.
have,
We have
really
time.
didn't have oral communication from the public for this particular meeting.
To Brown Act.
Is this a workshop or is it?
It's a workshop in my mind.
But how was it noticed? Dr. Grant?
Members of the
I
board-
certainly don't mind if the majority of the board says yes, that's fine with me. But again, same limitations.
My concern is, and
Yeah.
I originally wanted it as a workshop so that we can have a good interchange.
Right.
And I think we've had that so far. If it's a board meeting, I think if it's a joint meeting, I think you're going to be compelled
Yeah.
to have it.
Okay.
If not, maybe no. So
Then, yeah.
Mr. President, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, it was agendized as a board agenda item. There should be a portion where the public can address the board. You as president and the board could elect to have that public person who wants to state their issue at the open session as well as at this point in time, whenever you prefer, respectfully submitted.
Okay. let's move to the next item, and then we'll have the public speak, and then,
Okay. Next item, or, you want to talk, or you want Tom, or how do you want to do this?
actually, I'd like Mr. Calhoun to take the lead on this, and
Okay.
then you have a response, I believe.
So on item K7 on the regular agenda, the second item on this agenda is the district's response to the Propo performance audit. That item can be found in the regular agenda as K7 for those that are following along. This is the annual performance audit for Propo done in accordance with Proposition 39 requirements. It was done in accordance with general accounting standards, and also it was done through a process for selection of the committee that included a member of the Bond Oversight Committee. We received the comments, we responded to all the comments. I have seen the Bond Oversight Committee's comments on the audit. It was available for them. The last meeting, the district's comments were not made available to them until this time because it was agendized for the board to be accepted first, as is the customary practice of this board and many other boards throughout California.
We're not, in other words, we're not taking action on it tonight except to accept it as a report.
You're accepting the district comments and responses to the audit at the regular meeting. This item here tonight at this meeting is to discuss the committee's comments on the audit report.
And Mr. Marinovich, I know you want to make some comments. I did go through your preliminary comments, and many of them do deal with issues that I think we're addressing now, and I want to make sure Mr. Calhoun has an opportunity, so why don't you go ahead with your portion?
Okay, thank you. Just for a point of clarification, these, the chair report that's in front of you was approved for submission to the full board. And let me just preface my comments by saying that the latest example of docking a board item in which there's a district response to performance audit, when the Bond Oversight Committee had a meeting just last Wednesday in which those responses were prepared and ready to go, and I was told today they actually were in the hands of the board members to not share the district comments with the Bond Oversight Committee while you had us in for 2 hours or sometimes 3 hours in a meeting just right around the corner is indicative of the problem that we have as a committee, where sometimes there's an opportunity for us to provide input and comments to the district prior to going before the Board of Trustees, the staff comments, and we were not given that opportunity. Not because Tom Calhoun didn't want it, because that was the district internal policy in terms of interface